The world is drowning in debt, trillions and trillions of dollars. Numbers so vast, so incomprehensible, they almost defy imagination. $300 trillion, more than the combined wealth of every human being alive. But here's the real question. Who does the world actually owe all this money to? At first glance, it seems simple. Countries borrow to build roads, bridges, hospitals. Businesses borrow to expand, innovate, survive. Individuals borrow to buy homes, pay for education, or get through hard times. Debt is just a loan, right? Money borrowed with a promise to pay it back, usually with interest. But when you zoom out, the system starts to look less like a simple ledger and more like a vast, intricate web of obligations. A web so intertwined, so delicate, it can shake the foundations of entire economies. Every major economy is in debt. The United States alone owes over $30 trillion. Japan carries over $12 trillion. Even financial powerhouses like Germany, Britain, and France are swimming in debt, and yet the world keeps moving forward. Loans are repaid, new loans are taken, interest flows, money circulates like a river that never stops, yet always seems to rise. Behind the scenes, there's a network quietly profiting from this endless cycle. Not a secret cabal, not a single mastermind, but a system of banks, investors, and financial institutions that gain every time the money changes hands. They don't need wars, they don't need crises. The system guarantees their profit. Every loan, every bond, every government debt, every financial crisis. Someone somewhere makes money from it. Debt is more than a number. It's a tool, a mechanism that shapes global power, influences politics, and controls economies. Some call it the invisible hand of money. Others call it a trap, a cycle that keeps repeating, growing larger, harder to escape. So again, the question, the world is in all this debt, but to whom? And why does it feel like no one is ever in trouble? Debt isn't just a financial term. It's a concept that touches every level of life. Personal debt, like a mortgage or student loan, is easy to understand. You borrow a certain amount of money from a bank or lender, promising to pay it back over time, often with interest. That interest is the lender's profit, their reward for taking a risk. But on a national or global scale, debt becomes far more complex. Governments borrow money to fund programs, infrastructure, or even wars. But unlike an individual, a government can't go bankrupt in the usual sense. Instead, they issue bonds, essentially IOUs, that investors buy, lending the government money. Those investors could be banks, corporations, other countries, or even ordinary citizens through pension funds or mutual funds. The government promises to pay back the principal amount plus interest. But here's where it gets complicated. Countries don't just borrow a little at a time. They often borrow billions or even trillions. And they borrow not just from one place, but from multiple sources simultaneously. For example, the US government owes debt to foreign countries like Japan and China, but it also owes debt to the Federal Reserve, banks, and even American citizens through savings bonds. This creates a tangled web where countries owe money to each other in endless loops. Money itself is not static. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the US or the European Central Bank, can literally create money. They don't print it physically, but they can digitally increase balances in the banking system. Commercial banks then lend this money, often at multiples of the original amount, using a system called fractional reserve banking. Essentially, banks only keep a fraction of deposits on hand, lending the rest and making interest on loans. This creates more debt and more money simultaneously, a cycle that fuels economic growth and economic risk. Debt also grows faster than economies in many cases. Governments borrow to invest in growth, but interest compounds. Over decades, the total debt can outpace the actual wealth of a country. This is why even wealthy nations can appear poor in terms of debt to GDP ratios, and while debt sounds ominous, it's also what allows modern economies to function. Without borrowing, innovation would stall. Businesses couldn't grow, countries couldn't fund infrastructure. But the flip side is a system so intertwined that one collapse can ripple across the globe, like a row of dominoes. Now that we understand debt, we need to answer the core question: who actually holds it? The answer may surprise you. It's not a single person or even a single country. Debt is spread across governments, banks, corporations, and investors. A global network. Take the United States, for example. Around $30 trillion in debt is held in various forms. Foreign governments, Japan and China, are the largest foreign holders, together owning over a third of US debt held outside the country. They buy US Treasury bonds to invest their own excess capital safely. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, owns trillions in government bonds to manage the money supply and stabilize the economy. Private investors and institutions, banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, and even individual Americans hold government bonds. Pension funds, in particular, rely on these investments to guarantee retirements for millions. The same pattern exists globally. Germany owes debt to domestic banks and pension funds, as well as foreign investors. Greece's debt crisis highlighted how interconnected debt can become. When foreign banks began demanding repayment, the government had nowhere to turn without bailouts. Debt is also traded. Bonds are bought and sold daily, with interest rates determining their value. This trading creates a financial market where debt itself becomes an asset and profit is made whether the borrower thrives or struggles. Investors often profit from both the growth and crises of debt. Ultimately, a relatively small group of financial players, major banks, global investment funds, and central banks, control a disproportionate amount of the world's debt. They don't own countries, but they hold the keys to liquidity, credit, and capital. Every economic decision, whether a government raises taxes, cuts spending, or prints money, affects them. The debt system. Debt doesn't grow randomly. It grows because the entire financial world is built to run on it. Governments borrow because their responsibilities are endless and their income never matches their spending. Roads, hospitals, schools, defence, pensions, the bills never stop. Taxes aren't enough, so borrowing becomes a permanent part of the system. Governments issue bonds, investors buy them, and the cycle keeps moving. They don't borrow once. They borrow forever. Old loans are replaced with new ones. Interest keeps flowing, and the total number rises over time. This isn't a flaw. It's exactly how modern economies stay alive. Banks take this system and multiply it. The money sitting in a bank account doesn't stay there. It gets loaned out, used, redeposited, and reloaned. One amount becomes many, and each loan creates more debt. Banks profit from interest, so they need constant borrowing to stay alive. As long as people and governments keep taking loans, the machine keeps running, and when things get shaky, central banks step in, controlling interest rates, loosening or tightening the money supply, and keeping the system from breaking. They're the quiet operators who make sure the flow of money never stops. In this global loop, countries owe money to each other in every direction. The US owes Japan, Japan owes the US, Europe owes China, and China owes Europe. Pension funds in one country rely on government bonds from another. Corporations in Asia hold debt from America. It's a web so interconnected that no country can fully stand alone. This is why a financial crisis in one place spreads around the world in hours. Everything is tied together, and the people who own this debt aren't a secret group or a hidden elite. It's investors, banks, pension funds, governments, companies, and millions of ordinary people who have savings or retirement accounts. When a country pays interest, That money usually becomes someone's pension, someone's insurance, someone's investment return. Debt isn't some shadowy vault, it's part of everyday life, whether people realise it or not. The strangest part is that the world owes more money than physically exists, but that doesn't break the system, because debt is built on confidence, not cash. The belief that governments will keep borrowing, banks will keep lending, and economies will keep moving is what keeps everything running. Debt isn't just a number, it's the engine the world uses to move forward. Why the system never collapses? If the world owes more money than it can ever realistically pay back, then why doesn't the system crash? Why don't countries go bankrupt every week? The reason is simple, but almost impossible to grasp at first. Global debt doesn't need to be paid back. It only needs to be sustained. The entire financial world is built on constant motion, not completion. Governments don't borrow with the intention of clearing their balances. They borrow to keep the machine alive. Old debt is replaced with new debt. Interest is refinanced. Timelines are extended. And the cycle stretches endlessly into the future. As long as the system keeps flowing, nothing breaks. Only when the flow stops do things get dangerous. The truth is, no major government ever actually pays off its national debt. The US hasn't been debt-free since 1835. Japan's debt has been growing for decades. Even when countries run budget surpluses, the total debt rarely shrinks because the system depends on constant borrowing to function. Economies grow when money moves, not when it sits still. Banks need borrowers. Investors need bonds. Pension funds need interest, governments need liquidity, and citizens need opportunities, jobs, and services, all of which require spending far beyond tax income. Debt, in a strange sense, becomes a public utility, like water or electricity. Something the world relies on, even if it never fully understands it. Crashes only happen when confidence breaks. When investors suddenly believe a country might fail, they stop lending. When banks start doubting the future, they tighten credit. The system crashes not because the numbers are too big, but because the faith holding everything together shakes. That's why governments, whenever a crisis hits, rush to restore confidence first. Pumping money into markets, lowering interest rates, buying bonds, or printing trillions to calm everyone down, the numbers don't matter as much as the belief that everything will keep moving. As long as the world believes in tomorrow, the system survives today. The hidden winners of global debt. While countries and citizens struggle with loans, inflation, and financial uncertainty, there is a group that quietly benefits from every part of this cycle. Not a secret group in the shadows, not a single family or a hidden cabal, but an entire class of institutions built to profit from the world's constant borrowing. When governments issue bonds, banks and investment funds buy them, earning steady interest for decades. When people take loans, banks profit from every repayment. When central banks print money to stabilize the economy, financial markets often rally, boosting the portfolios of big investors. The real winners are the institutions that sit at the center of the financial system. Global banks, pension funds, hedge funds, insurance companies, and central banks. These entities handle trillions daily. They lend to governments, invest in bonds, trade currencies, and profit from interest rates and market fluctuations. Every crisis, every boom, every recession, they find a way to earn something. When a country's currency drops, investors trade it. When inflation rises, bond yields change, creating new opportunities. When governments take massive loans, investors provide the capital and collect interest for generations. But here's the twist. Most ordinary people are part of this system without realizing it. Pension funds that support retirees invest heavily in government bonds. Insurance companies that protect homes and businesses rely on interest income to stay afloat. Even a basic savings account benefits from this system. The world's debt isn't concentrated in a small hidden circle. It's spread across an entire financial ecosystem that includes banks, investors, institutions, and everyday citizens. It's not that these groups control the world, but they hold its most important asset, the flow of money. And yet, the system gives them a unique advantage. When governments struggle, these institutions gain leverage. When economies need help, they become the lenders of last resort. Over time, this gives them influence, not through conspiracy, but through sheer financial gravity. Money creates power, and debt creates dependency. The world doesn't answer to a single ruler, but it does revolve around those who can decide where money flows next. Why the debt keeps growing. One of the strangest truths about global finance is that debt doesn't just grow, it has to grow. When economies expand, populations rise, and prices increase, governments and businesses must borrow more just to maintain the same level of activity. Inflation makes everything more expensive, from building a highway to funding healthcare. As long as the cost of living rises, so does the cost of running a nation. And since tax revenue rarely keeps up, borrowing fills the gap. Every global crisis adds another layer of debt. Wars, recessions, pandemics, financial crashes, they all push governments to borrow massively to keep society functioning. The 2008 financial crisis added trillions. The pandemic added even more. Once new debt is created, it never disappears. It simply becomes part of the permanent landscape. This is why the world's total debt grows every decade, never shrinking. It's not mismanagement. It's the design of the modern financial engine. Technology also pushes debt higher. New industries need investment. Infrastructure needs upgrades. Energy systems have to change. Every advancement requires enormous capital. And since borrowing is cheaper and faster than raising taxes or waiting for revenue, governments take the shortcut. Businesses do the same. Even individuals are forced to borrow to keep up with education, housing, and the rising costs of life. Debt grows because the world grows, money grows because the population grows, and as long as the financial system depends on growth, the numbers will climb. The world isn't drowning, it's swimming, but the water gets deeper every year, and the only way forward is to keep moving. The final answer: who does the world actually owe? When you strip away the complexity, the trillions, the charts and theories, the answer becomes surprisingly simple. The world owes money to itself. Every dollar of debt is someone else's asset. Every government bond is someone's investment. Every loan is someone's income. The system looks terrifying from a distance, but up close it's a balance, a network of give and take. Borrowing and lending, risk and reward countries owe banks. Banks owe customers. Customers owe lenders. Governments owe pension funds. Pension funds owe retirees. Corporations owe investors. Investors owe markets. And at the centre of all this is the belief, the quiet, unspoken agreement, that the world will continue to function tomorrow. There is no single villain, no secret vault, no ultimate creditor waiting to collect. There is only a system built by humans, expanded through centuries, and now so vast that it has become one of the most powerful forces on Earth. Debt isn't the enemy. It's the structure we live inside, a structure that can be dangerous, unfair, and overwhelming, but also one that fuels progress, innovation, and global stability. So when people ask, the world is in all this debt, but to whom? The real answer is this: to everyone, to ourselves, to the system we created and can't live without.